one new sensor for each connection manager, custom dashboards, export and import them, graphs for custom queries, new panels for visualization, a bar chart, pie chart, tabular. The schema manager came about, and some custom system reports. And you could also do all of this good stuff in the HQ. Stored procedures and sequences, user-defined data types and data blades, added tables info for indexes, references, constraints, and triggers, a list of fragments, auto update statistics actions, create, enable, disable, and drop indexes with advanced options, create and drop your own databases, and create and drop the demo database, define your own SQL-based report. Any Syscart master query can be a report. Easy to use interface to define a report, including a data preview, a license report, save graph preferences, user preferences setting in my settings, save the time slice for all graphs in one location, a user-enhanced user interface for server and agent setup, start and stop scripts for HQ server and agent, scripts for both Windows and Linux. Now, obviously, some of these things have been superseded by other things that have happened in later releases, but this is what happened in that particular release. So here's an example of the connection managers and viewing and dropping and modifying service level agreements and creating a service level agreement. HQ gets some new features, a new connection manager, a new sensor, a graph for custom queries. We're not going to see all of the features graphically, we'll see some of them. Custom dashboards, pie, bar, and tabular charts. Bar at the top, pie in the middle, and tabular at the bottom. The schema manager. Custom report, user graph preferences, user graphs in action, and the GUI setup. Again, some of this has been superseded in later releases. XC4, Wire Listener, JDBC, JFoundation, and the CDC Java API. Wire Listener now has support for Mongo API versions 3.2 through 4.2. Informix password authentication for REST and MQTT, and performance improvements for REST. JDBC, JFoundation, and CDC Java API. So here we are with the Mongo API support for XC4. Starting XC4, we support up to 4.2 of MongoDB. This is not 100% feature compatibility with all of the newer MongoDB features and versions, but it is a base API compatibility. If you're working with customers looking to use Mongo, Wire Listener, and a new solution, we recommend that they choose one of the more recent Mongo API versions and configure the mongo.api.version configuration parameter in the Wire Listener properties file. The default value will remain 2.2 until vNext because of upgrades considerations, but we do recommend that any customers deploying a new solution start with a higher version. And due to XC4, you can also use Informix usernames and passwords when authenticating to the Wire Listener with a REST or an MQTT client. The Wire Listener passes the user password authentication credentials to the database server as part of the JDBC connection. My apologies. REST queries got a 25% up to 25% performance improvements. We made the max response size optional for REST and inherited the performance improvements made to JDBC 4.5.jc4. Type maps are how Java maps between a UDT and a custom Java class that can interpret it. BSON is a prime example. Prior to XC4, you could set up type maps in a JDBC connection, but you had to set it for each connection, leading to boilerplate code and applications with connection pools to keep the type maps up to date. Beginning in 4.5.4, we use a global type map builder, predefined with some built-in UDTs. Users can add their own global map, and each JDBC connection established will pre-set up its type map based on the global one. Some new connection parameters: metadata uppercase values for uppercase metadata results. Auto case schema instructs JDBC to automatically case the schema output on default or return the schema as it was saved. Cursor holdability instructs the driver to always hold cursors over a commit, same as connection.set holdability, but now it can be done via the URL or data source. Some new UDRs, helping generate statements to register JFoundation UDRs, provides a registry users can explore, generates the create, grant to public, and drop statements for every built-in UDR for JFoundation, returns to the user as a LVARCHAR. The user has to execute them in each database still. Option is coming for DB schema to generate gen function statement. New explain UDR generates a query on a server with full explain output enabled to a temp file. The option to set the avoid execute is not yet in the product at this point, but it is coming. No date yet. It retrieves the server-side explain file, returns it as an LVARCHAR, and it deletes the server-side explain file. Excuse me. Large object utilities returns the size of a large object with the lob size function. Concatenating character data with a clob into a new clob is the concat function. Appending character data into an existing clob is the append function. Dump out clobs as strings in up to 32K chunks is the append function. And creating a clob from any character data is a toString function. Some examples here on the screen. There's a Java Transaction Engine API for change data capture now. It simplifies the handling of CDC records by collecting entire transactions and applying filters. CDC typically sends a bunch of metadata and numerous operations and data records. You can use the new transaction engine to collect entire transactions together, as well as pre-filter out events you're not interested in, like rollback events, or maybe you're not interested in delete events, but only inserts. So OnStat enhancements. Table dictionary cache display for OnStat-GDIC. Displaying the part num and extent numbers per object on check-PE. The message date configuration parameters had some enhancements. OnStat-k has now got table names, and OnStat-gtop has new multiple options. So DIC0 is a new option prior to XC4. If you ran OnStat-GDIC, you got basic information about each table that is cached in the data dictionary. If you run OnStat-GDIC, table name, it then prints out the internal SQL information about that particular table. With the newly introduced option of OnStat-GDIC0, you can display internal SQL information for all of the cached tables. Some of the sample possibilities are here on the screen. So OnStat-GDIC0 piped through less, we see here. That's what it looks like. Quite a bit of information. On check minus PE now displays the chunk and table space extent information during the check of the object. Prior to XC4, the output contained only information about extent, offset, and size. This has not changed. Now we'll display the part num and extent number indexed from 1 of every entry if applicable. On check with part num and extent number, seen here on the screen. So if you grep the information looking for a specific, you have to sort the output to see it in extent creation order, because here, as you can see, the extents are not necessarily issued in a sequential order in terms of number of size of extent. Prior to XC4, you could use message date parameter to put a date at the message start printed to the online.log and MMDDYY format only. It was not respecting a localized setting. A hard-coded format of MMDDYY and HHMMSS now supports multiple locales. And there's also a timestamp format as well, seen here on the screen. 2 formats have been added, which gives more granular timestamps, providing subseconds in addition to the number of seconds since the epoch. Accepted values are below. Here on the screen, some sample outputs. Bottom one shows the United States locale. Timestamp data. Message date equal 3 at the top.
Scott, there's a question in the chat.
I'm operating on full screen mode. I can't even see it. Hold on a sec.
Oh, okay. No, I'll read it. From Kate, MMMM type -O on 134. I might have to have that interpreted by her later.
This is just the screen we're talking about. This is slide 134. Okay, what is the question again, please?
Sounds like in the third bullet point, you say the timestamp format is month in 4 positions rather than 2.
Yeah, you've got 4 months and then 2 Ys, but then in your accepted values below, it's YYY-MM-DD. I don't know. I don't know what 4 M's means.
Yeah, it should be 2 M's.
Yeah, that looks like a typo on my part, Kate. I'm going to take myself out and shoot myself now. So the rest of the presentation is going to be done by Carlton.
You better do that. Thanks, Kate.
On stat minus K shows the table name, DML operation of insert, update, and delete associated with the lock. Output rows with no entry in the DML column are not associated with a particular table. These are usually an intent exclusive lock. So if you have smaller machines, upgrading to version 14, if you're memory constrained, this could become a problem for you, having all the table names in the output. On stat minus K, no longer have to go to disk to get the table names. Table names now in memory for those tables recently opened. If not recently opened, you have to still go to disk for the table names. And if you don't like those table names being in the output parameter, you can always set kernel control. And the bit field governs kernel control switches. It should not be modified without the guidance of technical support. A number of switches are on by default. The current switches are shown here on the screen, and you should be able to turn off one of those. But as I said, you may need to talk to technical support first. The partition names here, for example, being the very first one. And if you want to know how to do this, there you go. On stat minus G top, the top consumers of various resources that you have out there over a specified interval. There's a lot of options here. I'm not going to go through all of them, but we have a couple of here that we can see. Valid entity and stat combinations are shown in a list there. And if you want to reverse your ordering, you capitalize the word with the value of whatever is placed in the stat field. So top chunk AWT in capital letters, for example. Now, what's important, one of the things that's important about this is a little bit of a change, is that the -R option doesn't necessarily work with this command. So you have to use the reps field instead, the last column over. So here's a sample of what you see. So you get a single line of output in every 5 seconds. Top 3 resources used in a 10-second interval. All categories every 5 seconds forever. Top threads that are CPUs. Every 5 seconds and forever. XC3, GSKit upgrades, and the rest of it was bug fixes. So there really wasn't a lot here. XC2. So XC2 had some interesting features. Keymip keystores. If a remote key server in a cluster or server supports the Keymip standard, a key store based on Keymip can be created. It can be used in storage space encryption and integrated backup encryption on Keystore. Options, type Keymip. For an integrated backup encryption, this kind of Keystore works similarly with Azure and AWS as well. For storage space encryption, the key name provided is the IDS master encryption key. Operators must have the following information beforehand: a Keymip server, IP address or host name where the server is listening. If the port where the server listens is different than the default, the port must be specified. Keymip username is the username to access the Keymip server. Optional in most cases. The access to the server is usually done via SSL. Keymip password is the password for a given username. Keymip client certificate file is a file containing the certificate for the client. The file must also contain the private key matching the certificate. Key is expected to be a PKSCS number 8 key, and the certificate is expected to have authentication extensions. The Keymip certification file, CA certification file, is a file containing the root CA signing for both Keymip client certificate file and the Keymip server certificate file. The Keymip key name is the name of the Keymip key used as a master encryption key by the storage spaces encryption feature, or as the remote master encryption key by the integrated backup feature. And if it's not present, on Keystore will generate a new key and report its ID to the operator. So there is some syntax for on Keystore. We'll just look at this briefly, just give you an idea. Notice the options for AWS and Azure. Partial indexes, also known as a filter index, is an index having some condition applied to it so that it includes a subset of rows in the table. Started in XC2, we support fragment by expression, partial index. Fragments are eliminated and use index off clauses to avoid index build and use. This reduces index build times and less disk index usage. Absent an index, it's not hard to guess how a query will run over an unindexed table fragment and fragments by expression clauses. Syntax is as seen here on the screen. Example with the DB access demo table. Queries with partial indexes, query that can use index zip IX would be shown at the top, and one that can't use an index is shown at the bottom, based on the previous example. Index scan explain. Xtrace. And sequential scan set explain output. And its Xtrace. Forest of trees index. Create index fragment by expression only is the only use for this at this time. You have to return the data values from a single row of the table. You must drop a partial index if you revert to a previous server version. And in the future, we're planning to do what you see here on the slide. If you need it sooner, please contact me. So this is a query the lab concocted. I thought you might be interested in it. Using CTE. Statement cache improvements. New sysmaster SSCLEM. Pseudo table is similar to the output of onstat-g SSC. Dumping a query plan from statements in the statement cache, invalidating specific statements in the statement cache, and locking query plans. So your system is stable and the statement cache is in a good place. And suddenly you have a performance problem out of the clear blue sky. Customer analysis discovers update statistics was run on some table. The statement cache entries with those tables are invalidated by design. Statements are re-optimized, and a new optimization produces query plans that are less desirable. Prior to XC2, all you could do was run on mode -E flush to flush the entire statement cache. Having the ability to view query plans, lock and invalidate specific statements gives the user more leverage to control and react to these situations. So there's a new table showing some of the differences between the onstat and the table. Output below. Sample output. Dumping the query plan from queries in the statement cache. New onconfig parameter statement cache query plan has acceptable values of 0 for disabled and 1 for enabled. It is disabled by default. It is dynamically tunable with the usual on mode -WF and WM. If you enable this, it will consume a lot more of your statement cache memory. And the query plan is viewable in the query plan column of sysmaster sysssc ELEM. SQExplain.out. If you want to invalidate a specific statement in the statement cache, set valid equals 0 where unique ID is 6 for a particular statement. And once it's invalidated, it cannot be revalidated. Invalidating a specific query in the statement cache. Locking a query plan in the statement cache. A locking statement will avoid reoptimization when minor versions of any table in the statement cache changes. For example, or any statement changes, pardon me. For example, by update statistics. So you set the locked column to 1 for a particular statement. In this case, statement number 7. And you'll notice the L in very light red next in the flag column, indicating that it is now locked. And select statement from the table. There it's setting to 1 rather than L. So Informix and Docker. What is Docker? I'm sure all of you know by now. It's a tool designed to make it easier to create, deploy, and run applications by using containers. Containers allow a developer to package up an application with all the parts needed, such as libraries and other dependencies, and ship it all out as one package. The application will run on any other Linux machine, regardless of any customized settings that the machine might have that could differ from the machine used for writing and testing the code. This is a very simple way to do microservices. So the image is an inert, immutable object file created with Docker build, and your application and all of its dependencies installed. Images are stored in a Docker registry, such as the IBM container registry, which will be up and running in Q1 of next year. A container is a running instance of an image. The images contain either Innovator C or Developer Edition, and the commands to pull them are shown on the right and where they're located. That would be here in GitHub, for example, as well. Repo contains Docker build files used by the Informix Docker images. Again, at IBM's container registry after Q1, in Q1, there's been a change. This is new. What usage is supported? Informix usage in containerized and virtual environments fully supported. If a customer runs supported Informix versions, they can open support tickets for the Informix product. Developer and Innovator Cs are available on the IBM Container Registry as a convenience. Docker files are used to build the image and scripts used for a custom setup. They are open sourced and available under the Apache 2.0 license. Docker files and associated scripts are maintained by the Informix community and not necessarily entitled for support through IBM, as open source files and scripts may change frequently. So to run the image, to run the Docker image, use the Docker run command. Provide any Docker run options as may be necessary, as shown on the right. Provide appropriate environment options to configure the Docker container accordingly at runtime. And when the container is run for the first time, the database server is initialized in the normal way with -init -iy. All Docker image options are provided through an environment variable passed on the Docker run command, specifying a size option that will auto-configure the Informix database, such as small, medium, and large. Storage of data can be of the following: a volume managed by Docker, a mount point, which is a user-managed directory mount point, local storage, data stored inside the container, and disable various connection points at runtime. All connectivity points are enabled by default. You can also supply a SQL init Informix.sql file used to configure and create your Informix instances and database. Provide a user-supplied on-config SQL host file. Provide scripts to run pre and post on init within the container, providing a user-supplied shell script to configure the system 100% manually. Provide a way to bypass initialization and configuration at runtime, allowing the HQ server to be started, allowing the HQ agent to be started and auto-configured with the HQ server. A use case would be to create a test system, creating a self-contained test system using the Informix image on IBM Container Registry, with all storage saved within the container and saved as a reusable Docker image. You can run the initial image with an option, -e storage equals local. Connect the Docker container and create any DB spaces and chunks, create databases and tables, and load any data needed for a test system. Taking Informix offline, commit and save the new Docker image. The new Docker image can be used as a test system and is created with the DB spaces and data that you created, and can be passed to development teams for development and testing purposes. You can also upgrade in the normal way inside the Docker image to Enterprise Edition and use it as an installed product. Connect to the Docker container. You're now in an environment where Informix is installed but not configured. Run the Edition installer to upgrade the database server and create an Informix database instance per your requirements. Take it offline, commit and save the new Docker image. This image can then be used in your production environment, assuming all the correct licensing is there. Change data stream API. Processes logical logs on log replay. Data processed is sent to the client application over large object API found in many drivers. For example, there is an ESQLC example in the directory shown here on the screen. Java API releasing starting 14.10 FC2 supports basic data types as well as large objects. Does not support user-defined data types, Supports a large set of record types: begin work, commit and rollback, truncate, insert, update, and delete. Can be used to stream entire database systems for heterogeneous replication. Data streaming is a practice whereby data is manipulated within a database and events, namely triggers, are generated by it that can be processed by either a database or an external application. There are no changes to your configurations or topologies, and applications are unaffected. Data gets pushed out to the users by the server. It's a subscription model. You get only the data you want to see, rows, the changes, etc. No pulling of the database, and all data can be filtered and pre-processed. The Java client library for work in Informix change data capture must have a minimum of JDBC 4.5.jc2 installed, includes your Java docs and JDBC installer. syscdc v1 database needs to be created and connected to, and there's a script for that in $Informix etc. And it takes a data source object as a constructor. So here's a sample of what it might look like with some explanations with the code being grouped by task. What was previously seen on that slide was done in about 20 or so lines of code. Same exact functionality in previous releases of Informix in version 12 took about 2,000 lines of code. So this is a fairly powerful method to stream data server changes out of the engine. It comes on 14.1 FC2 and greater at no extra cost. A little bit of summary on the various data streaming options that you have with Informix. Some new UDRs. These are defined per database, easy for Java to add, automatically built into the server, manual registration process presently. Eventually, you may get around to auto-registering these. So there's UUID, returns a universally unique 36-character in length unique ID based on Java's UUID. See an example here on the screen. Replace all replaces all matches of a character string with another string. Base 64 UDR generates an ASCII base 64 encoding of a binary object. So there was some upgrades to the IFX vson object.java for JDBC. You get better performance because of this using raw BSON documents. The raw docs are the purest form of BSON as compared to the parsed out form in Java objects. Caching of JSON keys are now implemented when using raw documents. More APIs keep the BSON documents in raw binary form. There's the ability to query a char, varchar or lvarchar, and treat it like a clob. Application compatibility feature, you get an immutable clob object, and you can then use clob get ASCII stream, position, get character stream, and other read-only clob operations with this. Wire listener, code path analysis of BSON documents, 10 to 15% performance and speed over common code paths. You can use native time series queries like shown below, directly query time series columns and use time series functions like clip. It renders the time series as a subdocument. Beware of the size of the time series queried. Decimal 128 support, Mongo compatibility. This all maps to Informix decimal. Shard join improvements. Joins between two sharded tables are allowed only when both shard table Both shard tables must have the exact same joining column as a key. Both must have exactly the same strategy defined on the key, the same exact partitioning conditions defined using the key. Both must have the same set of participating nodes, only equal joins allowed in the case of other non-expression strategies. No cross product among the shard tables and qualified conditions on the query. Previously, in some cases, errors got produced, and others, nothing got produced except data, even though there were errors. So that's a fix, basically. Sample here on the screen.
Just a friendly reminder, all these slides are in the recording that's being made now and will be available middle of next week.
So what's new in HQ in XC2? Customization, custom dashboards, custom SQL sensors, extensible alerting. Custom dashboards allow you to define user interface pages that show you the Informix monitoring data that is the most important to you. So here's a new dashboard at the top, new dashboard in action, being defined, and then in action. Custom SQL sensors, defining your own SQL-based sensors to customize what data is collected by the HQ agent. Any SysMaster SQL query can now be turned into a sensor. Easy to use user interface for defining sensors, including a preview of sensor data. Three different ways, three different screens showing the process of creating a sensor. Continuation, and you can see how to access it through the list of sensors that we maintain. Extensible alerting. A new extensible alerting option allows you to define a custom script to be executed whenever an alerting incident occurs. When the run script alerting notifications enabled, the HQ server will run the specified command on the OS whenever an alerting incident occurs. Before running your script, it will set the following environment variables containing info about the alerting incident. HQ administration, Schema Manager has some new features to it. The storage on tables and indexes comes about, performing storage optimization actions on compress, shrink, repack, and defragment, managing storage optimization policies, high availability, enterprise replication. I am going to take a very short break here for 2 minutes. Mother Nature's calling. My apologies.
Just in case anybody was wondering, there have been in between 40 and 50 people watching today. So you're not alone, even though everybody's muted. So we don't have a cacophony of activity. Anyway, you'll be back in a minute, I guess.
I'm back. Thank you for bearing with me. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're good.
Thank you.
That is your context menu, I guess, up there on the right.
That's where I left off too, right?
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry about that, folks, but these things sometimes happen. So we also did some improvements, auto update statistics, the privileges that we have for each user and all the objects that we have in the database, system reports, a full set of detailed reports on aspects of your database server performance, a task scheduler, memory manager. It's not spelled right. My apologies. And backups, new history timeline of your most recent database server backups. Schema manager, selecting a database and browsing the objects in that database. Tables, views, external tables, collections, system catalog tables. Details about any object, including columns, indexes, and constraints. Running ad hoc SQL queries against the database, page through query results, see query runtime. So here's an example. Table, columns on the table, its indexes. Catalog. A little bit more of a deep dive here. Items table. It's SQL at the top, in the data below. Analyzing storage characteristics of the tables and indexes in each of your databases, estimated compression savings, page usage, compress and uncompress, shrink, repack, defragment, and removing in-place alters are all available within HQ to do all those operations. And you can also manage your automatic storage optimization policies. So here's your tables and indexes. Space usage is shown graphically, as is the page usage. If an object's compressed, it will have a green check mark there, and if not, we'll have an X in red, as you can see for many of them. So here we are, deciding to do some work on tab 3 table, where we want to compress, repack, shrink, and defragment. And all I have to do is click apply, and that will do it. And the operation will go on in the background. Tables and indexes, your storage optimization policies. So I can enable the policies by whatever I selected below by hitting the very first check mark. If you don't hit that check mark, none of this becomes true. And here I can compress, repack, shrink, and defragment, as well as change the number of rows and the percentage levels for repacking the table and the shrinking level for shrinking the table. And decide if I want to, I won't touch a table for these policies unless I have a minimum of 100 extents. That's kind of what that says all there. And then it has a clock calendar down below where you can schedule when you want all this to occur and how often, and on selected days. To make this all active, though, the blue button at the bottom, update policies, must be executed by clicking it. High availability cluster, you see the cluster topology, primary and secondary server status details, SMX status, viewing and editing HA configuration parameters, monitoring the performance of your cluster, agent sensors for connection status, CPU workload percentage, transaction latency, lag time for each server in the cluster, HA logical log rates, logs processed per second, and the log backlog. You can view the history of these metrics graphically in the user interface and can also configure alerts on any of these metrics. So here you have it, what it looks like for each server in the cluster down below. Some of the graphics for the cluster metrics, looking at our workloads for color-coded by server. And down below further, graphic representation of lag time. Some more cluster metrics for the workload and lag time. Carry over from the previous screen at the top. Logical log rates and approximate log backup. Backlog, excuse me, my fault. Some high availability configuration changes are made available to you. So you can change any of these, whatever you want them to be that makes sense, obviously. Enterprise Replication has some similar features. You can see a node list of member servers, standalone versus cluster, node types, server versions. The ER node statistics that capture, apply, and network status, number of connections, pages until block. Spooled and pending transactions, disk usage, average latency, the fail rate, and ATS and RIS file counts. Enterprise Replication, graphic representation of the current cluster, and some data about each of the servers there below, as well as the group of the cluster and some data about that to capture the send queues, disk, the network, receive queues, and apply times. Enterprise Replication, the larger cluster. Obviously, I kind of like the graphic. You can manage automatic update statistics policies, ensuring queries continue to run efficiently as your data changes over time. So here's your auto update statistics configuration, when it's going to run, how often, the run frequency, start and stop times, configuration parameters and their values, and the statements further down below that are going to run. So your privileges, view and managing of your privileges on your database server, database level privileges, table level privileges, SQL admin API privileges, and internal users, map users. There's a graphic interface indicating your privileges, and those of resource and DBA are shown at the top. And the management of privileges for specific objects down below. Graphically, select Insert, Update, Delete. Detailed system reports on aspects of your database server performance. These are almost a direct copy of Open Admin Tools. Excuse me. Session activity. User, client program, session ID, PID, CPU time, IO wait time, rows processed, and then coming down to various different items being reported on. SQL with the highest estimated cost, for example. Oh, here's a decision tree showing the query plan. Statement above, tree below, and the statement statistics. And it extends off the page further down. Manage and customize sysadmin tasks for your database server with ad hoc executions. You can create your own sensors and your own tasks in the task section. schedule in addition to the ones that are already predefined for you. Here's an example of a task scheduler, and we're striking up one for running at a certain date and time and when we want it to be done. And we see the run history as well here in the main screen, main portion of the screen in the center. The memory manager, visualizing and monitoring your database server's memory usage, configuring its low memory manager configuration. Backups, new history timeline of your most recent database server backups. Another look at it, slightly different way. Usability enhancements, centralized user permission management. View and manage the entirety of the user permissions within HQ in a single place. A group incidents page, viewing all of the alerting incidents that occurred on an entire group of Informix servers from one centralized page. New logging framework, Logback, is implemented, allows for a better out-of-the-box logging experience, and provides enhanced options for logging customization. So here's your centralized user permission screen. View and manage all of the user permissions within a single place within Informix HQ. Groups incidents page and Logback. At the top, all of your incidents occurring on an entire Informix server group from one centralized page, and to the right, a sample of what the Logback output looks like. Can I ask a question? How much time have I got? We got,
It's 1:08 right now.
okay, we got 52 minutes left.
So I think we're scheduled till 2 o'clock. Yeah. So
Yeah.
52.
Okay. 52 minutes. Okay. I just want to make sure I'm getting confused here. I'm getting old.
It's COVID. That's all it is.
Yeah, it is what it is, believe me.
Yeah.
So we now have backup encryption, and we've had encryption of data at rest previously. But you know, the interesting thing is the thing that gets stolen the most in corporate America isn't the stuff directly over the wire, but rather backups. Backups tend to disappear and be forgotten about. And that's exactly why they get stolen, because nobody keeps track of them. So because your data gets backed up regularly and it creates multiple copies of the data, the long and short term of which, obviously a necessity, also creates a security headache. So now you can also encrypt your backups natively, allowing you to close the security loophole of unencrypted backups. And this also includes your logical log file backup. You can also do the off-site key encryption, which we talked about a little earlier, so we'll skip by this. TLS 1.2 came about in FC1. As I said earlier, it's now been supplanted by FC3. However, if you can't go to FC3, understand that TLS 1.2 is here. It's more secure than the previous 1.1, and I highly recommend it. Minimally, at least you go to 1.2 if you can't do 1.3. Current industry standard is 1.3, as I said earlier. You don't have to change your code usage for SSL. It simply implements this. So if you're using SSL, just set accordingly. While not new to Informix as a product, it's been possible for 10 years plus to encrypt all connectivity between all servers and between all clients and servers, and to create two-factor authentication for client apps via PAM. Ciphers and keys for these are completely different than those used for backups and disk storage. I call it building a better mousetrap, because this way here you don't have a single method for doing things. It makes it harder for somebody to steal stuff. Hacking communications ports, by the way, is still the oldest trick in the book for Unix and Linux, and you'd be surprised how many places are still having that happen to them. So I mentioned earlier about the remote key stores. Presently, Informix is 10% faster in FC1 compared to FC12 of version 12. It's at least 10% faster on most platforms due to changes in the overall compilation of the software infrastructure using more modern compilers, resulting in tighter and faster object and compiled code. Carlton mentioned this earlier. Here's the numbers that was done in that benchmark, just so you know. It's right down there at the bottom of the screen. Our biggest beta, as he mentioned earlier, had a major performance increase. It was 300% plus, and it's not marketing, that actually happened. Configurable log buffers, Carlton mentioned these. I will not spend a lot of time on them. Large object access time decreased by 30%. Network round trips reduced from 10 to 6 for pre-processing large objects. A configurable client-side statement cache was implemented. The JSON-BSON library was upgraded from 2.14 to 3.8. Gives the wire listener benefits. Stability and performance. There was 24,000 lines of code touched in Java JBC, hundreds of warnings and static code analysis issues fixed. We did an upgrade from JDBC 3.1 to 4.5. Upgraded the Java code from 1 to 1.8 from 1.2, and of course since then we've gone even further. Created an entire new build and deployment process for Java code, making it easier to build and deploy. Large object access is now 30% faster. We now have automatic class registration. Instead of having to write out each create procedure and function statement for every UDR you want and its corresponding grab and drop statements, now you can just provide the class name and JFoundation will automatically scan it and create the SQL for you. So that's pretty good. That's quite a few SQL statements you don't have to write any longer. So logback came in much faster than the previous serialized synchronized logger, better for server-side UDRs in terms of performance. That's where we're putting it these days, but as Carlton said, that's about to go the way of the Edsel. Added the option for disabling JFoundation Security Manager. It had up performance and really didn't do too much of anything. Batching server API calls leads to improved performance. Less memory recycling activity was the reason for that. And now you only get 2 .jar files shipping with the server instead of the 5 that was previous, and they're all packed into Krakatoa.jar. HQ came about and was a basic rudimentary operation, and a lot of the original features here have been supplanted, but understand that this was designed to be a replacement for OpenAdmin Tool. OpenAdmin Tool, unfortunately, had a very bad dependency on Flash, which has been deprecated by Adobe and is no longer available or even manufactured. It is an ongoing software development process, and HQ is not complete with its current functionality until at least minimally vNext. This year is 4 years ago. It's obviously not correct. So it will be vNext. New Enterprise Replication Migrate Server feature allows you to migrate an entire database server or database to another located locally, externally, or in the cloud to the same or different operating system and release of Informix on the target server, and from one page size to another, so that there is no data loss. This can all be done all at once or in a user determinable 6 ordered steps. Eventually, this will become one-click replication at some point in the future, because it hasn't happened yet in vNext. It hasn't happened yet in version 14. It is transactional and it is an online data movement. The new product key system to provide various version upgrades allows for a simplified method to do product upgrades and does not require a complete uninstall of the old and reinstall of the new. No longer installs the entire product for upgrades, just the differences. It changes the software tag if you change editions. There's less time and issues and no uninstall, reinstall. There's a couple of new files specifically named by edition installed. It no longer installs the entire Informix product unless new. It has you accept the IBM specific license agreement for that Informix edition. Installs the license files previously indicated. Installs edition specific software type files. And .jar file can be installed after the installation, or the install can install the .jar file. You leave the .jar file that you get in $Informix dir when you're done with it. Workgroup Edition now has 24 cores and 32 gig of memory limits, significantly higher than previous limits. No additional functionality allowed that is found in Enterprise Edition, for example. Customers will be able to process higher levels of workloads here. Informix 14 Enterprise Edition now includes compression. Previously, it was a for-charge item. It is now included at no additional charge. It allows customers on Enterprise Edition to put more data on a page and more data within a buffer pool page, thereby reducing disk I/O retrieval and increasing performance. Compression ratios obtained by using compression are data dependent and have been seen in the range of 2:1 to 6:1, with 4:1 being the most common. In particular, character columns and dates across entire records with lots of repeating patterns are particularly attractive to compression operations. Numeric columns with few repeating patterns, such as the answer to 22 divided by 7, are the least attractive. This is a great way to extend your hardware life with constrained resources and budgets, and it's now free in Enterprise Edition, as it is already available in Advanced Enterprise Edition, no additional charge. SQL 1999 compliant common table expressions have been added to Informix 14 and can be regarded as alternatives to derived tables from a subquery, views, and inline user-defined functions. This was customer requested, and it's one less thing that you have to rewrite in migrating from another database product, for example, to Informix. They are a temporary name result set of data derived from a simple SQL query and within the execution scope of a select, insert, update, or delete statement. Following situations, as seen here on the slide, are supported. And for some further information, there's all this good stuff. Most of it's about syslog. And I'm done.
Anything from Carlton? Take a look at the chat. There've been a couple of dialogues going on in there. One of which was a link to the documentation section of what's new thing on IBM.com, and the link does work, by the way. But if anybody else has other questions, shout into the chat, and if I'm brave, I might even unmute and let it go that way.
Thank you, Giselle. Nice of you to join. Thank you very much. I'll see you someday. I can't find my screen suddenly. I'm sorry. I have so many things up. Did I stop sharing? I didn't stop sharing, did I? I should do that. There
you go. Yeah.
Now I can see.
You had a spinner going on there for a second. Anybody else? Into the chat or on mute, if I'm brave.
We will have multiple presentations next week, including, I dare say, a full deck of everything in 14 with details as opposed to the slimmed down version that you've all seen here. So there'll be a final exam on approximately 1,200 or so odd slides.
I will make clear that a few people asked in the chat talking about FC8 versus FC9. And since one of the presentation titles was FC8, I think it applies that everything in FC8 is in FC9 with a bunch of bug fixes.
That's
So everything on the FC8 slides, you should go and get FC9 because it's the same stuff with fewer bugs.
Everything is brought forward unless we tell you otherwise. That also means we have to know about it to tell you otherwise. And FC9 has got all those bug fixes, about 150 odd plus number of APARs as well. So there was a great deal of attention paid to all the different bugs that were out there.
And as we move forward towards v.next, which will be the middle of next year, it's also reasonable to assume that any fix packs that come out between now and then will be like FC9, which is quality only, because we're saving up all the new features for v.next. Version 12 is already on a quality only release pattern, so there's no new enhancements being made to 12. And starting with FC9, unless there's something extremely compelling, you can expect that all future fix packs of 14 will be quality only.
There will be an FC10 next year at some point of version 14.
And there's a question, when do you expect vNext?
And vNext is anticipated currently to be Q2. I can't get more specific than that.
And as we have been saying for months, and I've written multiple articles about it in the IIUG Insider, when v.next is released, we will also be announcing the end of support timeline for version 12. So it's IBM's policy to support current version and one back, which once v.next is out will be v.next and 14. Which means 12 will start the end of support process. Typically, that's a 3 to 5 year process before it goes completely out of support. So those of you who are on 12, you might start planning for future upgrades.
And I would say you could confirm that Q2 is April to June.
That is correct.
Yep.
That's the current plans as of right now.
Yeah. All right, folks, anybody else? And keep in mind this entire session since 10 o'clock without the breaks has been recorded and will be made available midweek next week. So you can always go back then and take all the notes that you didn't take today. Anybody else? Last chance. All right, guys.
I hope to see all of you out in the road at some point. Good luck.
Thanks for attending. It was almost 50 people here today. So that's a good turnout.